Hello YouTube, Rick Wilson here. Yeah, I was just going to do a video on some stories from the Cold War when I was on submarines. I thought I'd put these out, and that way something was to... I've had relatives tell me I should document some of my stories, so I thought I'd do that. That's what this is going to be about. It's going to be about submarines and some of the things that happened while I was on the submarine in the Cold War. So first of all, some basic submarine information. This here is the Ulysses S. Grant. It's the first submarine I was stationed on. It's the one I seen the most action on. The other submarine was the Lee, and it was in the yards in Vallejo, California, being overhauled. So I never got to go out to sea on the Lee, but I did spend a couple years on the Grant. And first of all, these submarines, they're about 400 feet long, bigger than a football field. They're about 5 stories tall. They got these little planes on them that they use like an airplane to control. They help control your depth in the water along with your ballast. The steel on these submarines is something called HY80 steel. It's a flexible steel. It's not a rigid steel. If you made your submarines out of rigid steel, they would implode when they get too deep. The steel has to flex and give. We tied a string in. So I was a sonarman, and we tied a string from one side of the room to the other when the sub was on the surface once, and the fellas told me that when the sub dove down that you would see the string start bending until it touches the floor. That's how much the walls come in. The floors are on a slide. The floors are on this sliding thing. There's like a foot at the edge of each side of the floor where the floor meets the wall. There's nothing there. It's a sliding floor, so it allows for the walls to come in. But when we dove, that string, which we had stretched tight from one wall to the other, and then when we got down to depth, the string did it bent. The string kept, as we went deeper, the string would dip and dip until it was just a few inches off the floor, and so the whole submarine like shrinks in size as it goes deeper. And then there was a recent story on one of the other channels about Russians caught one of our subs in one of their bays, and they claimed that they chased it off. Well, let me tell you about that. These submarines, you got water layers in the water, the way the sound travels, and if you get like a layer of warm water between 2 layers of cold water, the sound will just bounce back and forth and stay inside that warm layer. I know there was a time we picked a ship up on sonar, and when we did the calculations, we figured out that the ship was like 500 miles away. And it just so happens we were in one of these inversion layers, and that sound had carried for 500 miles. We were picking up a ship on our sonar that was, like 5 times farther than what you normally would pick up. But anyway, we were depth charged. I was depth charged by the Russians once when I was on there, but I'll get into that in a minute. But I don't think they chased that sub away. I think that sub just went down deep and was hiding in a layer somewhere, and just sat back and watched those Russians running around looking for it, and they claim they chased it away. But anyway, and then when you're on a submarine, it takes a special kind of person to be on a submarine, because you go down and you don't see daylight for months. You're living in a space that you can't see more than 10 feet. Actually, when you come back from a patrol, you can't drive your car for 3 days because your depth perception is messed up. You can't tell how close a traffic light is or anything. It takes a few days to get your depth back. You kind of lose that when you're out to sea. But anyway, I was going to say that, and then the highlight of a submariner's day is the chow hall. Now, the submarines do got the best foods in the Navy. We had steak and lobster every Sunday, and every Wednesday was nationality night, and every Friday was pizza night. And something a submarine has that other ships in the Navy don't have is an open galley. If a submariner's hungry, he can just go into the galley and cook himself up whatever he wants, as long as he cleans up his mess. Because that's one thing, that's the only thing you got to look forward to on a submarine is your food. And so they treat you good on the food. But there are some things that can happen, like I said, it takes a special kind of person to be a submariner. You can't get excited easy. You got to maintain your composure at all times. For example, you might be a new guy on the sub and you're in the chow hall eating your dinner, and another sailor may walk up and just pull his dick out and lay it right in your mashed potatoes. Now, the true submarine way of handling that is to just stay calm and collected and act like you don't even see it, and just kind of take your fork and scoop the potatoes away and keep on eating. Because if you start screaming and yelling and making a big fuss, these guys are going to ride you for the rest of the patrol. So you just stay calm and collected no matter what. And then the only other entertainment is there's a ship's library down on the lower deck, and the thing's only about as big as a 8x8 room. It's not very big. But what happens in that library, it's not really a library. There are about 50 books down there, but as soon as that ship goes out to sea, suddenly a poker game starts. And it's a 24-hour poker game. As guys get off ship and go on ship, the other guys just get up and other guys are waiting to sit down. And it's a poker game that lasts for 24 hours for the entire patrol. The only time it stops is when they call battle stations or something like that. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the 3 times on the submarine that I nearly lost my life. There was 3 separate occasions. And and I served back in the 70s, by the way. That's what I was telling you. These are Cold War stories that I'm telling you. Things that happened. A lot of stuff happened back in the Cold War, and you don't hear about it. I'm sure that things go on right now that we don't hear about, but I think it's just something that is just the way it is. But we were out to sea one time, and the submarine's main goal is to remain undetected, and this Russian ship came out of nowhere and ran right over top of us, and apparently he heard us as he passed over, and so they did a turnaround, and then we went down deep, and he started dropping these depth charges. And things like this happened in the Cold War, and they may still happen today. I mean, they would drop the depth charges, and if they was to hit us or sink us or anything, they would just claim, oh, we didn't know the submarine was there, and we were conducting war games. That's the kind of stuff that would happen. But anyway, they dropped the depth charges, and I was on sonar, I got the headphones on, and then the depth charges, they drop them in 3s. It would go boom, 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 and then boom, boom, boom. And then immediately I would get off of the sonar, and there'd be another sonar standing behind me, sonarman, and because the explosions would kind of damage your hearing a little bit for a minute or so, the sonarman jumps up, hands the headphones to the next sonarman, and then he sits down, and then he's on the sonar until the next set of explosions go off. But they were dropping these things around us, but they never got really close to us. I think they were just dropping them at random. They couldn't find us. They heard us, they knew we were there, but then they lost us, and they couldn't pinpoint us after that. And I think that's probably what happened recently with this submarine over in Russia. They probably just heard them for a second, knew they were there, but then they couldn't find them again. Another time that I was nearly killed was nothing to do with the enemy. It was to do with one of our own people. I was in sonar on watch one day, and we were just in there on watch. You kind of learn to kind of half snooze, and you turn the wheel on the sonar, which is changing the bearing in a circle. You're going around, you're sweeping in a circle, 360-degree circle all the time, listening for other ships. So you just kind of learn to half sleep and turn that wheel, and when you suddenly run across the noise of a ship, you'll wake up and then start doing your job. But we were just in there, it was quiet and hadn't had nothing happen. And then we got to looking at the sonar supervisor says, well, why is the depth going? Why are we going so deep? We were going deeper, and we kept going deeper, and then we kept going deeper, and then we heard a commotion out in the control room. The control room's right outside of sonar. There's a door between us, and they asked me to step out there and see what the commotion is. And you got 2 guys that are on the planes that control them little wings. These little wings right here at the top of the sub. There's 2 guys that control these wings, and they sit in a chair and they're strapped in, and it's kind of like steering an airplane. You push it forward to dive, you pull it back to go up. And this guy just lost these marbles, and he had shoved, without saying a word, had shoved the planes into a dive and was just holding it there as far as it would go. And it took a couple minutes for anyone to realize what was going on, because the submarine's huge. It takes a minute or 2 to start moving, and then once it started going down and people realized that something was wrong, they've seen what he was doing, and then there was a lot of screaming and yelling, and they were trying to pull him off of the planes, and finally a chief petty, we had this chief petty officer who was about 7 foot tall. I don't know how he ever got on a submarine being 7 foot tall, but he was huge. he stepped up with this big monkey wrench, one of these big, like 3-foot long monkey wrenches, and he whacked this guy right upside the head and just cold cocked him. And then they emergency blew the tanks. But we were in there watching our depth. You know, now back then we were only allowed to say, if someone asked how deep a submarine goes, because they ask you that all the time, and we were only allowed to say in excess of 200 feet. But since this was 50 years ago, and this submarine I know is decommissioned now, I can probably go ahead and tell you that the submarines can actually go thousands with an S. Thousands of feet deep, and you have your cruising depth, which you normally run around 300-400 feet, maybe 500 feet, and then you got your test depth. The test depth is a depth you go to just once a year to check for leaks. They actually take the sub down deep, and then everybody on board has to go over every inch of the sub looking for any leaks. And they only do that about once a year. And then there's something called the crush depth, which nobody knows exactly what the crush depth is. The engineers that designed the sub, they estimate your crush depth. Well, when he put us in this deep dive, we actually went past our test depth, and we were approaching the crush depth, and that was about when they blew the tanks. But the sub was already going down, and once the sub is down deep, even if you blow all the air into your tanks, the tanks won't fill up completely because of the compression and the weight of the water. The tanks only might fill up halfway with air, so they don't work as good at deep depths. And we kept going deeper even though they blew the tanks, and we did actually pass up, I can't say what it is, but we did actually pass up the crush depth, which is theory, and we passed it up by about 50. We passed it by about 50 feet. According to the engineers, the submarine should have imploded. But I'm telling you what, they had full reverse the engines, emergency blew the tanks. They were doing everything they could to get back up, and that submarine just stayed at that depth for, it felt like 10 minutes. It might have been less, but it felt to me like about 10 minutes, and it took forever. The submarine was creaking and groaning and making noises I had never heard before. And then our depth started to lessen. We started to go up very slowly, and then it started going up more and picking up speed. And by the time we hit the surface, we were at a pretty good up angle. And that submarine, the only time I ever felt it, the submarine actually broke the surface and then went boom when it landed on the water. The front of that submarine, we were coming up so fast, actually left the water and then crashed down and made a big boom as we landed on the water. So that was another time. And then the other time and the fella that they cold cocked, they took him down to the corpsman, because a submarine doesn't surface for nothing. Well, there we surface, but we don't contact anyone. They just took him down to the corpsman, and they drugged him up, and he stayed sedated right up till the end of the patrol, and then he was took to the brig. And I do not know whatever happened to him, and I don't care. The other time was we got run over by a super tanker. We were cruising at our normal depth, and you got these new super tankers out there now. These things are humongous. They're like thousands of feet long and couple football fields wide. These things, they move oil, and they're huge. And what happens if you get a super tanker headed exactly directly at you, the propeller is behind it with this big bulk in front of it, so you don't hear it. So a super tanker can run right up on a submarine if it's coming at the right angle, and you'll never hear it until it's right on top of you. And that's what happened. We were cruising along one day, and then all of a sudden you could hear this propeller of that super tanker. And one of the sonarmen who was down at the lower level in his bunk heard the propeller noise right through the hull of the sub, and he come running up the sonar. What's going on? I hear screw noises out through the hull. And we explained it was a super tanker, and they were trying to get the sub deeper, but the super tanker, because of its size, it just sucks the sub up into it. And there's been collisions like this in the past. They try to keep them quiet, but occasionally a sub will come in with the sail. This top part, the sail, is damaged. I know they slipped one in Charleston one night and covered it all up with tarps and did a lot of work on it, and it left a few days later, and nobody ever said what actually happened. But I did see that with my own eyes. But anyway, this thing sucked us up into it, and we were watching the depth, and we got up to like 60 feet right when it passed over, and then it went by us, and we popped right up to the surface. And then the captain took the periscope and read the depth of the super tanker. Luckily it wasn't completely full, it wasn't drafting very deep, but it was at 50 feet draft, so we estimate that we passed within 5 feet of hitting it as we passed under it. So that was the other time so there was 3 different times: depth charges, and then the crazy man that put us into a deep dive that we just about didn't come out of, and then run over by the super tanker. Now there are times in the, you got to have a little levity too while you're on a submarine. So some of the, a lot of things we would do would be play pranks on other submariners, for entertainment. And what we did to the captain one time, the captain's stateroom was right outside of sonar, right across the hall. And we decided we had to do something to the captain. He's trying to figure out what we was going to do. Now the hallways on the submarine are very narrow. They're so narrow that when you pass another sailor, you have to turn sideways. But after you've been on the sub, you do it without even thinking. You can be moving at a quick pace and pass another sailor. You both turn sideways at exactly the same time, and you don't even break stride, and you just keep right on going. You just learn to do that on the submarine. The same as when you come to the hatches, there's a little bar above them. You learn to grab it and just swing yourself right through feet first. And you do it without even thinking. And but the captain's door was a standard door like you'd find almost like on your bedroom, except there's no doorknob because you would hit it because of walking by, because the passageway is so narrow. So they have something like a half ring that swivels down inside the door. You reach in there and pull it up and then turn it, and that way the door stays flush so people can walk by. So we went and we decided that while the captain was on duty right outside in the control room, that we were going to steal his door. So that's what we did. We had somebody stand guard at the control room door, keeping an eye, making sure the captain was still in his chair, and then two other firemen went over and took all the screws out of the captain's door all the way up and down and stole the door. And the captain, when he got off watch, come back and found his door missing. And basically the captain is the only person on the submarine that has a room to himself. The men are all berthed together, in 3 high bunk beds down in the berthing department. Some of the other men sleep down the lower level missile. The grunts that are the engine guys, the mechanics, they all stay in the back of the sub, and they tend to just drag mattresses back there and sleep right in the middle of the machinery. And some of them guys, you never seen the entire cruise. They go to the back of the sub and never come out. And but anyway, the captain's the only one that has a private room. So with his door gone, his room was no longer private. Everybody walked down the hallway could, see what he was doing in there, and he was not happy. He got on the intercom to the entire ship and made an announcement that until his door was returned, that he was not going to allow any watch on the ship to be relieved. So that the people that were on watch was going to stay on watch and not get off of watch until his door come back. Well, about 12 hours after that, people have been on watch for 12 straight hours. You normally stay on watch for 6 hours. It's 6 on, 6 off, 6 on, 6 off. So you can only get 5 hours sleep on a submarine at any given time. But 12 hours went by, and then the corpsman come on the intercom and said the corpsman's the only one that can override the captain's order for medical reasons. So he got on the intercom and said that he was, because of the people being tired and falling asleep and causing a danger to the ship, that he was ordering the watch to be relieved. So the people that had been on watch for 12 hours then got to get off of watch. Well, about 10 minutes later, the captain come back on the intercom and said that the corpsman overrode his order to relieve the watch. So what he was now going to do was he was ordering all the toilet seats on all the toilets in the sub to be removed, and the toilet seats were not going to be returned until his door came back. And so the next day, we hear the corpsman come back on the intercom again saying he was ordering the toilet seats to be returned to the toilets, overriding the captain's order because of health concerns. So they had to put the toilets back, and But it just so happened the next day the captain found his door. He had search parties out going to every part of the sub from the front to the back looking for this door, and he was really, he went 3 days unable to find something the size of a door. And on the third day he found it himself when he made his bed. We slipped the door right under his mattress. He had been sleeping on it for 3 days. So that's kind of one of the best pranks that sonar ever came up with that I know of. And then I'm going to talk about something else you may not want to hear. Smoking pot. Now, a lot of people smoke pot, and they always have, and they did back in the 70s too. It was a big, a lot of the guys smoke pot. But it's something you can't really do on a submarine. If you light a joint on a submarine, because of the recycling of the air, I mean, the air is recycled several times every 10 minutes. I mean, it just, they have to, because to keep carbon dioxide from building up. It's a closed system. So if you light a joint on a submarine, I mean, within 2 minutes, everybody on the submarine knows it. And that has happened. Suddenly you smell it, and the thing is, everybody can smell it. And there's about 100 men on this sub, about 100, and everybody can smell it within just a couple minutes. And then immediately the captain's ordered search parties out to find who's smoking weed on his submarine. So a smart submariner that smokes weed did not take weed. Any submarine port you go to, like Norfolk, you can go to Norfolk and find what, at least back then, what we called blonde Lebanese hash. And that's just a real concentrated powder kind of form of marijuana. It's just marijuana, but it's really compressed down and concentrated, and it's so strong that you could you take these teeny tiny little pipes, and the whole pipe wasn't no bigger than this, and it would just be a one-hit thing, and you'd put the hash in your pipe, and then you have to find somewhere on the sub where there's no people. And there are a couple places on the sub where there's no people. One good place to go was the upper level missile compartment, where the missile compartment's where the Poseidon missiles are. There's 16 missiles. Each missile has 16 nuclear warheads on it. And I got a picture actually here. There. That's a Poseidon missile after it's launched out of the water by a submarine. And believe it or not, the nose cone of this thing's just made out of balsa wood. And there's 16 warheads in there. This missile goes up into orbit, never comes down. It just goes into orbit and spits all these warheads out on all the different cities. So a submarine carries 16 of these, and well, the newer submarines carry even more. But back then, it was 16 of these missiles, and each missile had 16 warheads. So you just imagine the destruction one submarine can do. And by the way, they launch these things out of the sub. You can't launch a rocket engine inside the sub. It would melt everything. So they shoot this thing out of the tube with compressed air, and this thing goes to the surface of the water in a giant bubble of air. This balsa nose cone, it don't even get wet. It just goes up and then breaks the surface in a big bubble of air, and then the rocket fires when it's about 50 feet off the surface, and then off it goes. So, but anyway, you got your lower level missile compartment where there were some guys put their mattresses and would sleep down there, and then you got the middle level missile compartment, because this is a long compartment. It's the biggest compartment on the ship. It's a big long one, and you got the big missile tubes that run down each side of it. And the middle compartment was the one that you used to pass back and forth from the front of the ship to the rear of the ship. And the corpsman's office was there for medical. And then you got the upper level missile compartment, which is where the warheads are, and there's always radiation in that compartment, so nobody would linger. You're not supposed to linger in the upper level missile compartment more than 5 minutes. You would only use it if you had to pass through or had to do some maintenance work in there. But it was a good place to smoke your hash. You could put that little hit in that bowl and then go up to the upper level missile compartment, walk down the compartment about halfway, just step between two of the missiles, and then light that baby and take your one good toke, put it right back in your pocket. You have to do it in a hurry, and then just walk off. And then as soon as you hold that as long as you can, as soon as you come to a little vent, you blow it out. So that's how I know you don't want to hear this stuff, but it was done, and I'm sure it's still done. Another place I would do that at was, I had a friend that was in the Missile Control Center. Down in the very bottom of the sub is the Missile Control Center where they launch these missiles from, and it's got its own locked door with a combination that even the captain can't even get in. So in a time of a missile launch, they should close that door, and that room is closed off. Nobody can get in there except the guys that are in there, and that's so that nobody can stop them from doing their jobs. And they got the thing with the 2 keys on each side of the room, and 2 guys got to each put their key in and turn it at the same time and all that. But I had a friend that was in the missile control department, and so when he was on duty, I would go down there and we'd close that big ass door that nobody can get in, and then we were free just to sit in there and smoke. And we would just blow the smoke right into there was these rows and rows of computers that control these missiles, and they were super cool and had all this air sucking into them, and that's all you do is blow it right in there. But anyway, this was like a long time ago, people. You know, I'm getting pushing 60 now. I'm just telling you the way it was. So don't send me a bunch of nasty messages. I'm just telling you the way it was. And let's see, what else can we go over here? I got some other pictures here. This is the Lee, the second submarine that I was stationed on. It was out of Hawaii, but I never got to see Hawaii. It was in the shipyards in Vallejo, California when I was sent to it, and it was in the shipyard the entire year that I was on it. And so I just kind of went in to work every day and then left, and never really got out to sea on that one. And then let's see, there's my honorable discharge. And then my last few months I spent on this ship, the USS Kittiwake. This is a submarine rescue vehicle. Since I was waiting to get out, they just had to put me somewhere, so they put me on this submarine rescue vehicle since I had a knowledge of submarines. And I was a sonarman on it, and there was only one sonarman on this ship, unlike the submarine where there was about 10 of us. On this ship there was only one sonarman, and I was him. I was a one-man division, and because they didn't need the sonar unless they were looking for a sunken submarine. And right back here is this is a diving bell. This is what they would lower down to the sunken submarine to rescue the people. This diving bell attaches to the hatch on the top of the submarine. These are big buoys here, and if they had to rescue a submarine, they lower these buoys into the water on cables, and then they spread them out about 100 feet away from the ship in every direction, and they got anchors on them, and then the ship can then pull itself back and forth with these cables to hold itself over top of the submarine. And now I had a division officer on that ship that really hated me because he thought I was a slacker, which I was, and he was always trying to tell me that one of these days he was going to catch me. He said, one of these days, Wilson, I'm going to catch you. But and it used to really piss him off because right, all the men slept back here in this part of the ship, but the officers all had berthing up in here. Well, right outside in the hallway where the officers' berthing was, there was a hatch that went down to another level, and that's where all the sonar stacks were, all the stuff that held all the electronic equipment. Now the control panel for the sonar is up here in the top of the ship, and that's where I would sit when I used the sonar. But most of the sonar is actually down here in the lower part of the ship. But that hatch I would open up. I would go, I would want to take a nap, and I couldn't take a nap because you're supposed to be working. So I would go down there to that officer's quarters and take one of my manuals with me for the sonar, because we had maintenance we were supposed to do on the equipment on a weekly basis, and I would open up that hatch and then close it behind me, and then I would go down there and I would just lay on the floor and sleep. But what I would do is open up one of the pieces of equipment and get me a meter and lay it right there on the floor, and then when I heard him open the hatch to see what I was up to, I would hear that, and I would just grab the meter and stick my hands inside the unit like I was measuring something, and he would stick his head down and says, "What are you doing, Wilson?" I said, "Maintenance on the equipment, sir." And he would always say, "I know you're down there sleeping. One of these days I'm going to catch you. One of these days." But, he never did. And then the other story I got about this ship is the time it was called out for a special mission. Something that this ship had never done before. The Navy had lost something, and they had us pull into port, and they brought all this special, what they call side scan sonar, and they installed it real quick and then sent us out to sea. and I was the sonarman, so I was operating equipment, and I was told to find this object. And I said, well, what is the object? And they said, well, we can't tell you. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to find something, and you're not even going to tell me what I'm supposed to be looking for. And all they would say is that you'll know it when you see it. Otherwise, more than that, you have no need to know. So we went out to sea. We were, doing a grid pattern back and forth looking for this object. And all of a sudden, this Russian trawler showed up, and he starts following us. And then we knew what was happening. And then we could see diving equipment on the trawler, so we knew that the Russians were after this thing too, whatever it was, and they were just following us. They were going to let us find it, and then they were going to try to go down and get it before we did. And but we searched a grid pattern, and they stayed right with us. I mean, just 50 yards off of our side, right out here. They just stayed right out there, right along beside us, everywhere we went. Well, on about the third day, we actually saw the object on sonar, and we told the captain, and then they took the coordinates, and then they quickly moved off into another direction to keep the Russians from seeing it, and they stayed right with us. And so now we knew where the object was, but we couldn't get it without the Russians being right there. And so they ordered another naval ship out, and it came out and it ran alongside us. So now there was 3 of us, 2 U.S. ships and this Russian trawler. And then they had us and the other U.S. ship start running a grid pattern again, and then move away from each other. And then the Russian trawler would have to choose one ship or the other. And we were hoping he would follow the other ship, and then we would go straight to the spot and recover this thing. And but the trawler stayed with us, and we're the ones that had the divers, and we were the one that had all the equipment to go down and get it. And so we met up 2 days later with the U.S. ship again, and we did the same thing. We started running a grid pattern, and we went separate ways again. Only this time the Russians followed the other ship, and we went straight to the spot where this thing was. The divers went down. They had these big wooden crates on the back of the ship to put this thing in, and when they went down, they made us cover every porthole on the ship with paper, and every single sailor had to go inside the ship and close every hatch, and nobody was allowed outside except for the divers. And they brought this thing up and put it in these boxes without a soul other than the divers ever seeing what it actually was. And to this day, I do not know what it was. All I know, it was an hourglass shape from the sonar. But beyond that, I don't have a clue. And one other thing about the Russians, when the Russians were sitting right out here, we were outside one day, right here along the rail, and we were giving the Russians the finger. We was giving them the finger, and the chief petty officer come up behind us and said, "What are you doing, boys?" And we thought we were in trouble, and we was like, "Nothing, Chief. We ain't doing nothing." And the chief said, "Boys, I seen what you're doing. You're giving them Ruskies the finger." He said, "Look at them over there. They're waving." He said, "It's different culture, boys." He said, "They don't understand what this means." He said, "They're over there. You're giving them the finger, and they're over there waving at you." He said, "Let me give you a lesson in communication." And the chief stepped up to the rail right there, unzipped his pants, he pulled his wang out and started shaking them at the Russians. And you could see all them Russians suddenly stopped waving, and they were like pointing like that, like look, look, look. And then the chief turned around and says, "Boys, they know what that means." And off he walked. So anyway, that's about it. I can't think of nothing else. Well, there was a time we pulled in down on the submarine. We pulled in down at Florida one day. The only liberty I ever had. We got to pull in there for one day, because submarines usually just pull right back in where they always go, and they leave the same port and come back to the same port. Never get to see nothing really. It ain't like some of these other surface ships where you get a stop everywhere you go. I did see the coast of France through the periscope once, but that was it. But anyway, we were down at I can't think of the name of the town. It's down there by the Space Center. But anyway, we were at the dock, and we had tried to get a pop machine for everyone so we could have Pepsis and stuff in a pop machine, and they said that we didn't have enough men on the ship to warrant one. So we were at this pier down there, and the captain comes off the ship leaving, and a bunch of us standing down there on the pier, and the captain looks over at the pop machine that's sitting on the pier, and he said, "Boys, it sure would be nice to have a Coke machine just like that one down in our mess hall." He said, "Wouldn't that be nice?" And the captain walked away, and we all kind of looked at each other saying, "Does the captain mean what we think he means?" And we kind of decided, well, we think he did. We think that's what he meant. So we got a bunch of guys together, and we disconnected that Coke machine. We carried it right up there, and they brought some engineers up, and they disassembled that thing and took it down so quick that nobody knew what happened, and they reassembled it, and they just had a big padlock on it once it got down in the mess hall. And we had our Coke machine where we could have anytime you wanted a Coke, you could just push a button and get a Coke. And but that's it. I can't think of much else. I mean, there was some other stuff happened, but when I was in school and stuff like that out in California for the submarines, but I just kind of sticking to the stuff that actually happened. Oh, I got some other pictures here I can show you real quick. Let's see. Here's some pictures I took myself. This is looking back. I was in the top of the cell. I was in the actual top. Let me go back to the other picture here. So I was actually up here where you see these little people. See, there's some little, might not be able to see it, but right up there there's some little bitty people. And that's where I was when I shot this picture. And then this was that was looking toward the rear of the sub. Now this one's looking toward the bow of the sub, the front of the sub. And I have a picture somewhere of some dolphins right here jumping out of the water on either side of the sub, because the dolphins would stay with you the entire time you're out to sea. Man, as soon as that sub would go out to sea, them dolphins was with you, because I was on the sonar and they would talk to me and they'd laugh and make noises, and you'd hear them the entire voyage. They would never shut up. You'd hear a lot of different sea life. You'd hear shrimps cracking and popping, like it sounded like a frying bacon whenever you'd pass over a bed of shrimp. One day I was on watch and just half asleep, and all of a sudden I hear this loud scream like a woman had been stabbed. It was just awful scream, and I jumped up, and the sonar supervisor says, "What's the matter?" And I said, "There was this awful scream." And I said, "It sounded like a woman screaming." So he got into the secret safe there and pulled out some biological tapes, and he played me a tape of what sounded like the same scream, and I said, "Yes, that's what I heard." And he said that is the boing fish. They have these tapes for sonarmen to refer to, that you can play. And he said it's called the boing fish. Nobody knows what the boing fish is. It just sounds like a lady screaming. He said a sonarman can sometimes spend an entire career and never ever hear the boing fish. He said you're mighty lucky to have heard that. So that was another unusual thing. Now here's a picture of the sub beside the sub tender when we were in Charleston. And then I got 3 pictures of fellas that were on submarines. I don't remember the name. I believe this guy's name was Roger. You can see he's having a good time. And I think this guy's name was Kenneth. And I remember this guy. We called him Bear because of his beard. He looked like a big bear. But anyway, we were all young, and these are the kind of guys you got running your nuclear submarines. so anyway, that's all. I hope you enjoyed my stories. I just thought I'd put them out, and maybe after I'm gone, these stories will still be out there. Let people know what it was like in the Cold War. So see y'all later.